Hello, Milwaukee Bucks fans. Welcome back to another episode of Bucks Latest presented by Fan Arch. As always, I'm your host, Dean Simon. And before we get into everything, please make sure to leave a like, leave a comment down below, and also subscribe. We are still very much on the road to 1,000 subscribers, so I would really appreciate it if you could hit that big red button down below. Also, turn on post notifications so you don't miss out on future episodes. Okay, so first thing we're going to start off with is that, of course, in the wake of the Damien Lillard wave and stretch, a lot of both media members and just pundits in general are wondering how the Milwaukee Bucks are going to fare in terms of their 3 point percentage, their 3 point attempts. But this is some kind of a development that we've all known of that the Bucks going into next year are going to put a major emphasis on just heaving up more threes, and that's something that you could have predicted just looking at the stat sheet and the overall placement of the Milwaukee Bucks in terms of 3 point percentage. Number one in the NBA at 38.7%, but 18th in the NBA in 3 point attempts. And also just in general, the Bucks were eighth in the league in field goal percentage. I forget the specific number, but eighth in field goal percentage. And then they were, I think, bottom five or bottom seven around in field goal attempts. We just got to get up more shots, and that's what is going to be the focus in terms of getting in transition, playing with more pace, and just getting more field goal attempts and specifically 3 point attempts up. And this is something that John Horst actually talked about himself during an interview with the Athletics' Eric Nem. And they were talking about a bunch of different things, just the Bucks offseason in general, and then the conversation came to what the previous season looked like and in terms of the 3 point attempts. So these are the words of John Horst in that interview. Last year, we were the best 3 point shooting team in the NBA efficiency wise, average at best in frequency. I think we were probably like 15, 16, 17. I think if we get that number into the top 10 and we stay in the top 2 or 3 percentage wise, it's going to have a big impact on our productivity throughout the season. Our style of play will allow us to do that, and the talent we have will allow us to do that. Frankly, even though losing one of the greatest 3 point shooters of all time in Damian Lillard is going to be a huge blow, a guy that attempted 9 threes a game this past year, percentage wise, he wasn't necessarily helping the Bucks reach that figure of 38.7%. He shot about 37% himself, so he was only really knocking down a little over 3 of those 9 attempts per game. But I think the one thing that we need to look at here is that the Bucks were able to bring back Torian Prince, and keep AJ Green, who's still, the extension talks have extended to this point, and we have not come to a resolution on that front. But Torian Prince, AJ Green, and Gary Trent Jr., respectively, they were 3, 8, and 21, I believe, in the NBA in 3 point percentage this past season. So instead of giving Damian Lillard all of those 3 point attempts, you're now more evenly spreading the attempts amongst guys that were, again, top 3, 8, and 20 essentially in the NBA. So I feel like that can only lead to a good result and more 3 point production because you're putting the ball in the hands of the guys that you know are going to knock down threes at a higher clip. So I'm not necessarily worried about the Bucks 3 point productivity going into next year because we know from this past year, from the personnel that they were able to keep and bring back on great deals, that they're going to be knocking down a great percentage of their threes. But it's just a matter of reverting to the previous gameplay or game style of previous Bucks coaches. Even from 23-24, Doc Rivers' offense put up the second most threes per game that season 2 years ago, and then we fall to 18th. It doesn't really make sense. It doesn't compute to me, especially with Damian Lillard still on the roster and having all these guys shoot great percentages. But that's going to be the main emphasis is just getting up more threes, and the goal is to remain top three percentage wise, while also getting into maybe the top 5 to 8 range at least in attempts. Either way, that will end up with a positive 3 point production for the Milwaukee Bucks. But moving forward, we're going to talk about an article that came out from Fansided's Swoosh Shrestha, and that is a hard name to pronounce, but this is more talking about the Bucks' perimeter defense and that with the different kinds of adjustments that they made throughout the offseason and the different personnel at the guard position specifically, what can we really expect from their perimeter defense because of their depth chart at the guard positions? And this article was kind of half negative, half positive Swoosh came in around the end and mentioned that guys like Cole Anthony and Kevin Porter Jr. had pretty great defensive ratings per 100 possessions, defensive box plus minus, all those kinds of stats or advanced stats. And I feel like that's something that we can't just gloss over and move right past. That Cole Anthony in effect had his best defensive season this past year and has been a net positive defender despite his stature throughout his career, and especially as a part of Orlando Magic teams that have been some of the best defensive teams or one of the best defensive teams in the NBA. Cole Anthony proved that he could provide his own uh, net positive defense to a team like that, despite his size. And I'm looking forward to him maintaining that kind of edge on defense, and I'm expecting for opposing teams to kind of underestimate him in that sense and think that he's just someone that can be attacked. But he's stronger than he looks, obviously super athletic, and that helps him in a shot blocking capacity, which you'd be surprised to find that last season I think it was point 0.4 or point 0.5 blocks per game for Cole Anthony. But not even just Cole Anthony, for Kevin Porter Jr. as well, had a fantastic defensive season, at least the portion of the season with the Bucks, that final 30-ish games, averaged 1.3 steals a game, also boosted up those defensive box plus minus numbers as well. So this is all to say that the Bucks have several net positive defenders at the guard positions, and it's not like they're just going to be pushed around. And to put that in tandem with guys like Gary Trent Jr. and Torian Prince, who again they are not necessarily the greatest defenders of all time, but these are guys that compete every second they're out there on the floor on the defensive side of the ball, and they're going to give it everything they have. And if they get beat, then man, woe is them. They have Giannis and Myles Turner behind them. I feel like we are not really taking into account that the Bucks were able to form what should inarguably be the best defensive front court in the NBA. So this is kind of like a Rudy Gobert on the Utah Jazz kind of situation where the Jazz's perimeter defenders were just awful. And it was just Rudy Gobert as that last line of defense, and he carried them from being a terrible defense to a great one. And this for this iteration of the Milwaukee Bucks, the perimeter defensive unit isn't that bad. And then behind them, again, most likely the best defensive front court tandem in the NBA, full stop. So it's not like the guards on the perimeter have to be perfect in terms of their effort on the defensive side. They just have to be serviceable enough so that they can support Giannis and Myles Turner again in enough of a capacity to where they can help them get out and run and make big plays and get in passing lanes and things like that. It's all going to be about the extra little stuff for the guards on the perimeter defensive side of things. So we've talked about three-point shooting, we've talked about defense, but now we're going to get into a little more straight up personnel kind of decisions, because this is something that or a kind of decision that we've been coming to over the past couple of weeks, and as training camp is about to start as of recording this next week on the 29th. So we are actually this close to watching actual real NBA basketball. Maybe nothing that counts when the preseason begins on October 4th, but we are this much closer to actually watching NBA basketball. So exciting. Can't wait to cover the actual season for you guys. But um, back on track. Andre Jackson Jr. is most likely the one that's on the chopping block and someone that the Bucks are going to be looking at as the main guy to go to in terms of if they need to waive a certain player, because they have 16 guys with standard contracts on the team. Obviously, that number needs to be cut down to 15. You go for the guy that in Andre Jackson Jr., who may be one of the Bucks' best defensive players, but he's just a complete non-factor on offense when he's not rumbling towards the basket in a wide open lane or catching a lob. He's pretty much again a zero. Not shouldn't say a zero because in terms of 3-point percentage, he was one of those guys that was helping the Bucks raise that team figure to 38.7%. But again, just the attempts weren't there. You can't really substantiate that with the number of attempts that he was taking. You can't really come to the conclusion that Andre Jackson Jr. is this amazing shooter just because of something like that. But Ajax is probably the most likely one to go, and Fansided's Dalton Sell wrote an article basically agreeing with this premise, and this especially comes after the Bucks brought back Thanasis, and you have to make a spot on the roster essentially for him no matter what. Dalton Sell's words were, "It's only a matter of time before Jackson is let go. That will make room for Thanasis, but questions will persist about Amir Coffey. Bringing Thanasis Antetokounmpo back is a fine move. Everyone knows what he means to this locker room and his brother Giannis. However, it would have made much more sense to figure out Coffey's situation before handing him a fully guaranteed contract." A lot of what Dalton Sell talks about in this piece is that Amir Coffey, there's no way that the Bucks just brought him in as sort of this summer fling, as a guy they're just bringing in for training camp, and that's all. And they're not really expecting to keep him on the actual roster. That in my mind couldn't be further from what they're expecting out of Amir Coffey going into training camp. But even though he is on a training camp deal, or he's classified as one of the training camp guys, I feel like it's more than sensible to come to the conclusion that he will be a rotational player for this Bucks team coming up in the next few weeks and going into next month when the regular season begins. But really, this is all just coming down to the obvious, or kind of the inevitable, what we've been thinking for the last little while, and especially after Summer League, that Andre Jackson Jr. is most likely going to be the one to go. And while it is sad because I've been so high on him for the past couple of years, just his defensive impact and potential is limitless to me. um, the lack of offense is really what's dragging him down. So that will be what will help lead the Bucks to a solution on that front. Finally, we're going to talk about, and I know the Giannis trade stuff is overblown, and it's beating a dead horse, and that um, Giannis is most likely going to remain a Milwaukee Buck for the rest of his career. But what I will say is that if by some sliver of a chance that Giannis were to contemplate leaving the Bucks seriously, that the Golden State Warriors would serve as the biggest threat to Giannis Antetokounmpo on that front by trying to trade for him in 2027. And there have been numerous sources, and one that I took down for myself is the Athletics' Sam Amick, who talked about the Warriors and the whole Jonathan Kuminga situation, and whether they wanted to trade Kuminga to the Sacramento Kings for Malik Monk and the ramifications of that. And while talking about this, Sam Amick kind of stumbled on to the point that the Golden State Warriors might not want to make a trade for Malik Monk, or trade away Kuminga in general, because they want to keep their options open for 2027 when they can go after either Giannis or Nikola Jokic. So he said himself, Monk's current contract runs through the 27-28 season when he has a player option worth $21.5 million. The length of his deal poses a similar problem to the one the Warriors have had in the negotiations with Kuminga, as they want to maintain maximum flexibility for that 2027 summer. As it stands, they only have Moody's $13.4 million contract and Buddy Hield's $10 million player option on the books by then. So the reason why overall the Golden State Warriors would be the biggest threat to Giannis, or for Giannis leaving, is just the fact that Giannis and Steph Curry have just been so connected and kind of intertwined with each other over the past couple of years. And that there's just like little interesting tidbits, like Giannis being one of the, or I think the only guy that wasn't that was in the NBA but wasn't on the Golden State Warriors to attend Steph's birthday party this past March, and just how gleeful they seem to be when they're around each other all the time. And they're always, you know how there's always guys in the NBA that when they're talking to each other after a game, they kind of, put their mouths under their shirts, and you see that they're really talking about something, but you just would wish to, be a fly on the wall for that conversation. They are two guys that are at the pinnacle of that tactic of hiding their conversations and just but looking happy as ever doing it. Um just the potential chemistry between those two, and the situation, the allure of going to team up with Steph, and hopefully, or for their case, hopefully that Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green, and a couple of other great serviceable rotation players are still in the picture. That's what Giannis could possibly be leaning towards. Or if the Milwaukee Bucks have a disappointing season this year, disappointing season next year, and it comes to the trade deadline or the summer of 27, um, the options could really be open for him, and he could take that as a real opportunity to try and win alongside Steph Curry. And but that's it. Outside of Golden State, I will say on the record that there are no other credible threats, I feel, that could really make a move for Giannis, or at least there are no other credible threats that can enter the fray in terms of trade talks and things like that, and trying to start negotiations that Giannis would see and be like, yeah, I want to go there. I feel like it's good for my future, like personally, just where I want to be and the kind of guys I want to surround myself with. I want to go there. It's really, in my mind, only Golden State and only to team up with Steph that could be the only option that's in the back of his mind. But all of this talk is moot potentially because I don't see Giannis Antetokounmpo ever leaving the Milwaukee Bucks, of course. And if we get past 2027 and the Golden State Warriors don't pull off one of the craziest trades in NBA history, that's what we're going to be staring at, that Giannis will be a Milwaukee Bucks lifer. But anyways, that'll be it for me today. Thank you very much for tuning into another episode of Bucks Latest presented by FanArch. Again, I've been Dean Simon. Make sure to leave a like, leave a comment, and subscribe. Still on the road to 1,000 subscribers. So if you hit that button, would be greatly appreciated. Turn on post notifications for future videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Go Bucks.